Celia Monroe burst through the stairwell door, her chest heaving as the blaring fire alarm echoed off the concrete walls. "Out of all mornings," she muttered, clutching her tote bag tighter to her shoulder as her scuffed sneakers slapped against the steps. She was already late to clock in at the hotel's front desk, and now this an unexpected fire drill. She didn't even work in this building. She just stopped by the adjoining conference center to drop off a lost purse someone had turned in at the front desk. And of course, the second she stepped inside, the alarm went off. "Excuse me? Ma'am, please move to the designated exit," a deep voice called out from behind her. Celia turned mid-step and caught sight of a man in a crisp navy jacket with a laminated badge clipped to his chest. He looked like he belonged more in a GQ spread than a safety inspection. Dark, tousled hair, sharp jawline, polished leather shoes, and a stare that stopped her in her tracks. "I'm trying," she shot back, resuming her sprint. "I was just dropping something off." "I don't even work here." The man raised an eyebrow and followed her down the stairs, clipboard in hand. "Then you're in the wrong building during a fire drill. That's 2 strikes." She reached the ground floor and shoved open the exit door, stepping into the bright morning sun. Groups of people huddled on the sidewalk, some laughing, others annoyed. Celia bent forward, catching her breath. The man exited behind her, speaking into a radio clipped to his shoulder. His voice was low and controlled. "All clear on South Tower stairwell A. No hazards, no injuries." She squinted at him again. There was something about the way he carried himself, not just confident, commanding, like he wasn't just checking for safety, like he owned the place. "You're not really a fire marshal, are you?" she asked, straightening. He looked at her for a beat, amused. "Not officially. I'm the building's safety liaison. I like to make sure things run the way they're supposed to." "You mean you like to boss people around?" she challenged, brushing hair from her eyes. He tilted his head. "Only when they run into buildings they don't work in during active drills." Celia narrowed her eyes. Her heart was still pounding, but not just from the stairs anymore. "I'm Celia Monroe, front desk at the Marlowe Hotel." She stuck out her hand, defiant. The man took it. His grip was warm, firm. "Sterling Lancaster, part owner of the Marlowe properties." Her mouth fell open just slightly. The Marlowe Hotel wasn't just any hotel, it was one of the most luxurious in the city, and he was the owner. "Oh," she said, blinking. "So, you're my boss," he smiled, just enough to make her stomach flip. "Technically, but don't worry, I'm not writing you up for trespassing." "I wasn't trespassing, I was helping a guest." "Then maybe I should be thanking you," Celia flushed. "Maybe you should." They stood there for a moment too long. She shifted her weight, suddenly aware of the coffee stain on her sleeve, the chipped nail polish, the fact that she hadn't even had time to put on mascara that morning. "I should get back," she said, stepping away. "I've got a shift to start." "Go ahead," he said. "I'll walk with you. I need to check the kitchen exit line anyway." They walked in silence through the connecting corridor to the hotel lobby. It was still early, and the marble floors gleamed under the sunlight pouring through the glass ceiling. "So, how long have you been working here?" he asked, glancing over. 2 years, she said. "Started part-time while I was finishing school." "What did you study?" "Hospitality and business management." Sterling nodded. "Smart. You want to run a hotel someday?" She laughed. "I'd settle for a promotion that lets me stop answering phones every day." He didn't laugh. He just looked at her, really looked at her. "You're too sharp to be stuck behind a desk forever." Celia stopped walking. "What does that mean?" "It means I notice things. You handled an emergency calmly. You took initiative. You're not afraid to speak up. That's rare." She stared at him, unsure how to respond. No one had ever said something like that to her. Not her professors, not her manager, and definitely not someone who casually walked around in $1,000 shoes like it was nothing. Sterling glanced at his watch. "I've got a meeting, but I'd like to talk more." "Dinner?" Celia blinked. "Dinner, tonight, my treat. There's a rooftop restaurant at the Ridgeview, you'll love it." She hesitated. "Why?" He smiled again. "Because I think you're worth knowing, Celia Monroe." She opened her mouth to respond, but her mind was spinning. This man, this millionaire hotel owner, wanted to have dinner with her after a fire drill. "Okay," she said finally. "But just dinner?" "Of course," he said, already pulling a card from his wallet. Ask for the Lancaster reservation, 7 sharp." And just like that, he walked away, disappearing into a private elevator, leaving her with his business card and a heart that wouldn't stop racing. Her friend Mariah nearly screamed when she told her later during their lunch break. "You're kidding me. Sterling Lancaster, he's on the cover of Forbes. He's loaded, Celia, like private jet loaded." Celia stared down at the card in her hand. She didn't care about the money. Or at least, she didn't want to. But the way he looked at her like she wasn't just another name badge behind a desk, that was something she hadn't felt in a long time. Still, she almost didn't go. She stood outside the Ridgeview rooftop restaurant at 6:58, heart hammering. Her dress was borrowed, her heels were a half size too small, and she had no idea what she was walking into. But when the elevator doors opened and she stepped out onto the rooftop, she saw him standing there by the glass railing, the city lights glowing behind him, and he turned like he'd been waiting just for her. "You came," he said, his voice low. "You invited me." He offered his hand. "Let me show you something." She took it. And as he led her to the table already set with champagne and candles, she realized something she hadn't expected. She wasn't nervous anymore, not because of the view, or the restaurant, or even the idea of dining with a millionaire. It was because of the way he looked at her, as if somehow, without even knowing it, he'd been checking for more than just safety all along. Celia hadn't known what to expect when she agreed to dinner. But it certainly wasn't a 12-course tasting menu served on a rooftop terrace, glowing with lantern light and soft jazz echoing from the speakers. The stars above the city shimmered like scattered diamonds, and the skyline stretched endlessly behind Sterling as he poured her a glass of wine without asking whether she drank. She watched him, noting the ease with which he moved, as though there was never a question of whether he belonged. He didn't glance at the prices or hesitate before ordering. The staff addressed him with the sort of deference usually reserved for royalty or high-ranking diplomats. Still, he didn't look at her like she was beneath him. "So," she began, swirling her wine to buy a second of courage, "do you always use fire drills to scout out employees?" He let out a quiet laugh. "Only when they run headfirst into a building like they're on a rescue mission. You make it sound like I charged in with a cape. I wouldn't be surprised if you had one tucked under that cardigan earlier." She tilted her head. "What exactly were you doing in that stairwell anyway?" "I was overseeing an inspection for the board. They like to send someone from ownership around every quarter. Usually it's my brother, but he's in Dubai this week. And you volunteered," I insisted. He set his glass down and leaned forward slightly. "I like seeing the ground level. If you only look from the top, you miss all the cracks forming underneath." Celia blinked. It was an answer she hadn't expected, thoughtful, almost vulnerable. Most people in your position would rather stay in the penthouse and let someone else deal with the cracks. I was raised differently. She studied him, unsure if she should press, but curiosity tugged at her. "Differently how?" Sterling hesitated, then picked up his fork and shifted the food on his plate. "My mother was a schoolteacher. My father was a contractor. We didn't always have this." He gestured vaguely around them. "They taught me to build before I bought. I started by flipping houses with my dad. The first hotel I managed was barely a 3-star. Celia leaned back, surprised. "You mean you actually worked your way up?" Painfully. "And I made more mistakes than I care to count." He looked at her, and something flickered in his expression, genuine regret, maybe. "But I learned fast. One of those lessons was that the people who know the heartbeat of a business aren't the ones holding the checkbook. They're the ones answering phones and returning lost purses." Her chest tightened at the mention. He hadn't forgotten. "I guess I'm more used to being invisible," she said softly. "You're not invisible to me." Her breath caught. She hadn't expected that, so direct, so certain. The tension between them shifted, stretched thinner. Before she could respond, a waiter appeared with another course sea base with a citrus glaze, and the moment dissolved like sugar in tea. They ate in silence for a few minutes, the kind of silence that buzzed with thoughts neither of them voiced. "You know," she said, pushing a piece of fish around her plate, "I can't tell if this is a job interview or a date." Sterling looked amused. "Do you want it to be one or the other?" "I don't know yet," she admitted. But I do know you're not doing this because you need someone to fill a position. I'm not, he agreed. I'm doing it because I haven't met someone who challenges me in a long time. That's a lot of pressure to put on someone you met during a fire drill. You took that pressure and kept your head, and then you stood your ground. That's not something I forget. Celia didn't know what to say to that. Compliments usually made her uncomfortable, especially ones that felt so intentional, not shallow, not flirtatious, real. She took another sip of wine. So what happens now? You wine and dine me, then what? Then I ask if you want to see what I see. She blinked. What do you mean? He leaned back, folding his hands on the table. The Marlowe has a management training program. Very few people get into it and fewer still make it through. I could recommend you. But only if you want it. She stared at him, stunned. You're offering me a spot. I'm offering you a shot. You'd still have to apply, still have to interview. It wouldn't be handed to you. But I'd make sure your name isn't buried at the bottom of the pile. Celia looked down at her plate, heart thrumming. This was more than dinner, more than flirtation. It was a door she hadn't even known existed suddenly opening in front of her. I don't want special treatment, she said quietly. I'm not offering special treatment. I'm offering recognition. She lifted her gaze to his. Why me? His reply was immediate. Because you didn't wait for someone else to do the right thing. You just did it. The air between them crackled with something unspoken, something neither of them wanted to name yet. Eventually, they left the restaurant and rode the private elevator down in silence. When they reached the lobby, he turned to her. I'll have someone from HR send you the application, but whether or not you take it, that's up to you. And what about this? She asked, gesturing between them. Dinner, rooftop views, all of it. A trace of something unreadable passed over his face. That's also up to you. She hesitated, then nodded. Then I guess you'll just have to wait and see. He stepped back, allowing her to pass through the glass doors first. The city buzzed around her, but her thoughts were louder. As she walked to the subway, heels clicking against the pavement, she didn't notice the man in the dark sedan parked across the street, watching her. Sterling sat in the backseat, his jaw tight as he adjusted his cufflink. Don't follow her, he said to the driver. But find out who she reports to. I want to know if she's been overlooked. The driver nodded and pulled into traffic. Sterling's gaze stayed fixed on the sidewalk where Celia had vanished. He wasn't just checking for cracks in buildings anymore. He was checking for the one thing he hadn't expected to find in a fire drill, something real. A week passed before Celia heard anything. Not from Sterling, not from HR, not even a whisper from her manager, though she did catch him glancing at her during shift changes with a flicker of something like confusion, as if trying to remember whether she'd always been there. She tried not to think about it. She threw herself into work, answered phones with practiced cheer, helped guests without blinking, and avoided the temptation to check her inbox every 10 minutes. She told herself it didn't matter. That the dinner had been a brief moment, a strange intersection of luck and curiosity, and she should let it go. Then the email arrived. The subject line was simple. Marlowe Management Acceleration Track Application Materials Enclosed. Her heart jumped. She didn't open it right away. Instead, she finished her shift, walked to her apartment with aching feet, and sat on the worn couch in her tiny living room, staring at the screen like it might vanish if she blinked. After reading it twice, she printed out the forms. The program was real. The deadline was in 48 hours. And there was no mention of Sterling Lancaster anywhere in the documents. That night, she filled out the application, rewrote her resume, and typed a personal statement so many times she had to ice her wrists. She didn't tell anyone, not her roommate, not Mariah, not even her cousin who always said she should aim higher. It felt too fragile to speak aloud. By the time she turned it in, 3 minutes before the deadline, her nerves had hardened into something sharper: determination. The following Friday, her manager called her into his office. You've been selected for the final round of interviews, he said, his voice unusually formal. It's being held at the Lancaster estate. Celia blinked. The estate. The family hosts it annually for finalists. You'll be there 3 days, all expenses covered. She swallowed. So it's not just a panel interview. He shook his head. It's a test of everything: presentation, decision-making, adaptability. They want to see how you handle pressure in real time. Celia walked out of that office with a duffel bag of nerves and a head full of panic. She'd expected maybe an interview over Zoom, maybe a one-day sit-down in a boardroom, not an immersive weekend with the Lancaster family. 2 mornings later, a black town car pulled up outside her building. The driver handed her an itinerary but offered no details beyond the address. The ride took nearly an hour, winding past the outskirts of the city and into a wooded stretch where the trees grew taller and closer together. When the car finally stopped, Celia stepped out and forgot how to breathe. The estate wasn't a house. It was a manor: stone columns, arched windows, and a sweeping circular driveway. The kind of place where every light fixture looked older than the country itself. A woman in a tailored gray dress greeted her at the door. "Welcome, Miss Monroe. Please follow me to the south garden. The group is gathering for the first task." Celia followed her past a grand staircase, through a solarium filled with orchids, and out a set of French doors. The garden was pristine, all hedges and climbing roses, with a marble fountain in the center gurgling quietly. There were 5 other candidates. All wore polished shoes, tailored suits, sleek hair. Celia's blazer, borrowed from Mariah, suddenly felt too casual. Then she saw him. Sterling stood at the edge of the garden, speaking with an older man in a linen jacket. His posture was relaxed, but his gaze flicked quickly over the group before landing on her. For the briefest second, his expression shifted: surprise, maybe, or something warmer, but then it was gone. He didn't approach her. Instead, a woman stepped forward and addressed the group. "My name is Helena Lancaster, and I'll be overseeing this weekend's evaluations. You've all been selected because someone noticed your potential. Over the next 3 days, we'll see how that potential holds up under pressure." She outlined the schedule: 3 tasks, each designed to test a different skill: collaboration, leadership, crisis resolution. "You'll be watched," Helena said simply, "but not always directly. We value discretion as much as decisiveness." Celia's stomach tightened. They were assigned rooms in the guest wing. Hers overlooked a small lake at the back of the property, and the decor looked like it had been curated by royalty: plush armchairs, a carved writing desk, and curtains so thick they muffled even the birdsong outside. The first task began that afternoon. They were divided into pairs and asked to rebuild a mock event plan for a fictional client whose venue had suddenly canceled. Celia was paired with a man named Jordan who had a finance background and a voice like velvet. He took one look at the project brief and said, "Let's just make it look good on paper. They won't care about logistics." Celia disagreed quietly at first, then more firmly when he started cutting corners. "They're testing how we solve problems, not how fast we can bluff." He raised an eyebrow. "You really think they care about that?" She didn't answer. She just took the lead and restructured the plan, sourcing alternate vendors using the estate's internal directory and mapping out a contingency schedule. She didn't realize until it was over that Sterling had walked through the room halfway through, pausing behind her without saying a word. That night, there was a formal dinner in the East Hall. Long tables, crystal glasses, and silver cutlery that looked like it had never been used. Celia wore a navy dress borrowed from her roommate, and though she tried to blend in, she could feel eyes on her the moment she walked in. Sterling was seated at the center table, flanked by 2 board members. He didn't look at her once during the meal. But as the plates were cleared and soft music played from the corner, Helena rose and tapped her glass. "Before we conclude," she said, "one of our hosts would like to say a few words." Sterling stood slowly, jacket unbuttoned, tie loosened just slightly. His voice when he spoke was calm and measured. "We believe leadership isn't about control," he said. "It's about clarity, about seeing what others miss and choosing to act anyway." Celia held her breath. "This weekend isn't just about business acumen, it's about character." And trust me, his gaze swept the room, landing on her just long enough to make her chest tighten. "We see more than you think." As the guests murmured their approval, he stepped down from the dais and disappeared through a side door. Later that night, Celia found a note slipped under her door. It wasn't signed, But the handwriting was unmistakable. Meet me at the lake. Midnight. She stared at it for a long time, then she changed out of her dress, pulled on a coat, and stepped into the dark. Celia stood at the edge of the lake, moonlight brushing the water in long silver ribbons. A light breeze rolled across the surface, sending ripples outward like whispers. She tugged her coat tighter and glanced around. The grounds were silent, no footsteps, no voices, just the hush of midnight and the soft rustle of leaves. Then she heard it measured steps on the gravel path behind her. "You came," Sterling said, his voice low. She turned. "You're the one who left the note. I had to see you without the rest of them watching." She hesitated, watching him step closer. He was no longer wearing his jacket, just a dark sweater pushed to his elbows, his stance more relaxed than she'd ever seen it. "I thought you weren't supposed to influence the outcome," she said. "I'm not," he replied. "But I'm not here as a judge tonight." "Then what are you?" He didn't look away. "Someone who made a mistake by pretending this weekend was only about the program." Celia's heart pressed hard against her ribs. "You mean it's not for me?" "Not since I watched you take over that project like you'd been running this place your whole life." "I didn't do it for you, Sterling. I know, that's why it mattered." She stared at him. "You can't do this. You can't offer me a chance at something I've worked years for and then blur the lines. You don't get to be both the gatekeeper and the distraction." "I'm not trying to distract you. I'm trying to tell you that I see something I haven't seen in a long time, and not just in your work." Celia stepped back. "You saw me once during a fire drill and invited me to dinner. That doesn't make this anything real." "Then tell me it hasn't been real for you." Silence stretched between them. She didn't answer, couldn't. He moved closer. "I've been surrounded by people who want something from me my entire life, investors, partners, even family, and then you showed up. No pretense, no performance. You spoke to me like I was just a man standing in a stairwell." "Because I didn't know you were anything else," she said, "and now that you do," Celia didn't look away. "Now I know exactly how dangerous this could be." Sterling's jaw tightened. "I won't let your name be touched. If you walk away from this program, it won't follow you. If you stay, I'll recuse myself from final selection." "You do that." "I already have," she blinked. "What?" "I stepped out of the committee this morning." Her breath caught. "Why?" "Because I didn't want to be the reason you questioned whether you'd earned it." Celia stared at him, the weight of his words slowly sinking in. The man who owned the program, who could have guaranteed her a place with a signature, had stepped aside. "I thought you were the kind of person who always stayed in control," she said. "I usually am, but everything about you makes me want to loosen my grip." He reached for her hand, not demanding, just offering. "If this goes nowhere," he said, "I can live with it. But if I don't try and you disappear into another city or another job, I'll regret it every day." Celia's fingers curled slowly into his. "You left me a note," she said. "You could have just sent someone. I didn't want anyone else to see my face when I asked you to stay, and if I didn't come, I'd have waited anyway." Her throat tightened. "I don't want to be your exception, Sterling. You're not. You're the rule I've been ignoring." The wind picked up slightly, rustling the trees behind them. She exhaled. "I'm scared." "So am I." They stood in silence, hands linked, the lake behind them still and quiet. The next morning, she walked into the final session with her shoulders squared and her chin lifted. Sterling was nowhere in sight. The task was brutal, an hour-long scenario simulation with rapid-fire decisions and shifting roles. By the end, her hands were trembling and her mind felt like it had run a marathon. But she didn't falter. That afternoon, Helena gathered the candidates in the library and announced the results. Celia's name was the first called. She didn't cry. She didn't cheer. She just closed her eyes for a moment and let herself breathe. As the others were dismissed, Helena approached her. "You made an impression," she said simply. "Thank you," Celia responded, her voice steady. Helena studied her for a long moment. "He didn't tell me to pick you. In fact, he made it very clear he wasn't involved." "I know. But I can see why he noticed you," Celia nodded. "I didn't come here for him." "I didn't say you did," Helena said, then turned and walked away. That evening, as the guests began to leave, Celia stepped out onto the front steps of the estate. Her suitcase was already loaded into one of the cars. She hadn't seen Sterling since the lake. Then a sleek black car rolled to a stop at the edge of the drive and the passenger door opened. He didn't say anything at first, just looked at her from the sidewalk. "I'm not going back to the city tonight," he said. "I thought maybe you wouldn't want to either." She hesitated. What would we be, Sterling? Two people who didn't expect to find this. Whatever this is. And if it doesn't work, then we'll know we tried. Celia stepped forward slowly. "I don't want to be a footnote in your story. You're not. You're the chapter that changes everything." She let out a breath and climbed into the car. As they pulled away from the estate, the sky turned gold behind them. She glanced out the window once, watching the manor fade into the trees, and then she looked at him. No fire alarms, no stairwells. Just the man beside her, his hand resting on the space between them, waiting. She reached for it, without hesitation. The Marlowe's executive offices had always felt like sacred ground off limits to anyone not holding a title or walking on clouds of privilege. But now, Celia walked through the glass doors with a badge clipped to her blazer, a leather-bound notebook in one hand and a tablet in the other. It had been 3 months since the Lancaster estate, and the management program had launched her into a position she hadn't dared to imagine before, a junior operations liaison, shadowing senior executives and learning every pulse of the business. She'd earned every inch of it. Sterling had kept his distance professionally. He hadn't crossed any lines, no office visits, no lunch drop-ins, no lingering glances in staff meetings. It was as though they'd drawn a line in the sand and honored it, both of them too proud to blur what they'd fought to establish, until now. Celia stepped into the conference room just as the board meeting wrapped. Sterling stood at the end of the table, sleeves rolled back, his tie nowhere in sight. He looked tired, but his eyes lit the moment they found hers. "You're early," he said, glancing at the clock. "I'm presenting in 10 minutes, she replied. "I wanted to make sure the tech worked." He nodded toward the screen. "Already set it up for you. You didn't have to do that. I wanted to." They stood in the quiet, the last of the board members filing out behind them. One woman gave Celia a curious look but said nothing. "Are we still pretending you're just another executive in the building?" she asked, his jaw flexed slightly. "I don't think we ever were, but I didn't want your success tied to mine. It never was. I know that now." Celia folded her arms. "So what happens next?" Sterling walked to the window, watching the city blur beneath them. "We've been walking this line, hoping it would keep things clean, but it's done the opposite. I haven't stopped thinking about you since that night by the lake." She stayed quiet. "I've watched you climb higher, take on more, become exactly what I knew you could be. And the truth is, I don't want to keep loving you from a distance." Her breath caught. "You never said you loved me." "I thought it was obvious." She stepped closer, slowly. "You once told me you weren't afraid of pressure." "I lied." Celia touched his hand lightly. "Then say it again, without fear." Sterling turned to her fully, his voice steady. "I love you. I've tried to bury it under caution and time and logic, but I love you. And I want to be with you, not behind closed doors or at secret lakes. I want a life." She looked up at him, her voice soft but unshaken. "Then let's build one, but only if it's equal. I don't want to be rescued. I want to stand next to you." His hand curled around hers. "That's the only way I'd have it." The door opened and one of the senior directors peeked in. "Sorry to interrupt, Celia, they're ready for you." She turned to go, but Sterling caught her wrist gently. "One more thing," he said. She raised an eyebrow. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "I've carried this for 6 weeks. I wasn't going to say anything until after your probationary period, but it doesn't make sense to wait anymore." Celia stared at the box, pulse racing. He opened it slowly. Inside was a rose gold band, delicate and simple, with a diamond that caught the morning light like a prism. "I'm not asking for an answer today or tomorrow. But when you're ready, I want to spend the rest of my life with you, however long it takes, however far we go." She blinked hard, words caught in her throat. Then, slowly, she reached up and kissed him. It wasn't dramatic or desperate, it was certain, honest, complete. When she pulled back, her voice was clear. "Yes." Sterling stared at her, stunned. "You don't need time. I've had enough of that. I know what this is." He stepped back, visibly shaken by emotion. "You have a meeting." "I'll be right back," she said, flashing him a grin. Try not to propose to anyone else while I'm gone." The next few weeks moved fast. Word spread about their engagement, not through tabloids or gossip, but through a carefully worded company announcement that emphasized transparency and mutual respect. No one questioned her promotion. No one whispered about favoritism. Her work spoke louder than any ring ever could. Sterling, for his part, respected her boundaries, never overreaching, never letting their relationship tip the scale of her career. They balanced, they grew, they thrived. The wedding took place in late spring, in a restored greenhouse on the edge of the city. It was filled with climbing wisteria, glass chandeliers, and a string quartet that played beneath the rustle of leaves. There were no magazine photographers, no press releases. Just friends, family, and 100 flickering candles. Miriah cried during the vows. Sterling's mother clasped Celia's hands and whispered, "He's not the only one lucky in this." Afterward, they danced under the stars, not caring who watched. Their first dance wasn't choreographed. It wasn't perfect, it was real. Weeks later, they returned to the Marlowe, not as owner and employee, but as partners. Sterling moved his office to a different floor to avoid any appearance of impropriety. Celia was promoted again, this time without his intervention. She began developing a mentorship program for underrepresented staff, determined to make sure others had the same shot she'd fought for. One evening, Sterling found her in the garden behind the hotel, barefoot in the grass, laughing as she watered a row of potted succulents she'd insisted the rooftop needed. He just watched her, arms crossed, heart full. "You're going to turn this place into a jungle," he said. She squinted at him. "You say that like it's a bad thing." He walked over, kissed her temple, and took the watering can. "Then let's build a jungle." They walked inside together, past the concierge desk, past the marble lobby where they'd first met. No alarms, no emergencies. Just two people who had turned a moment into a lifetime, and they never stopped choosing each other. Every single day.